Hello, Elizabeth here, and today I'm going to show you how I made each of the elements of this McDonald's felt food playset. My nephew just turned 3 and he loves McDonald's, so I thought a plush playset of McDonald's food would be an awesome gift to give him this year. And he absolutely loved it, so if you've got a McDonald's obsessed kid in your life, I think this is a really special DIY gift you can make for them. This is a very time-consuming project and it took me many hours to complete, but if you can cut felt and do some basic hand sewing, it should be very achievable for you. If you love to craft as much as I do, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel and check out my weekly DIY tutorials. I post a new video every Friday. I'm gonna walk you through everything step by step. I started by making the hamburger. To make the burger buns and patties, you'll need 2 circles of a lighter brown felt for each bun and 2 circles of a darker brown felt for each burger patty. I traced this lid from a small cardboard container for my circles, but you could also use a large mug or a cream cheese tub or whatever you've got that's the right shape and size. For the top bun of the burger, I used a light brown embroidery thread to sew some little stitches all over it to look like sesame seeds on the bun. Next, I sewed my 2 pieces together. My favorite way to sew felt together is with a blanket stitch using a piece of embroidery thread that matches the color of the felt I'm using. I tie a knot in the end of my thread and start by sewing from the inside of one of the pieces to hide that knot. Then I stick my needle through both layers from back to front and pass my needle up through the loop before pulling tight so that the thread creates a little border along the outside edge of the item. Then I move 1 stitch length and repeat, sticking my needle from back to front through both layers and passing my needle up through the loop, pulling tight. And repeat all the way around. This is a nice secure stitch that will keep your stuffing contained. And this is how I did all of my sewing to connect all of my pieces for the entirety of this felt set. Once most of my stitches are sewn but there's still a little open pocket, I take a little bit of stuffing and carefully insert it inside the item before doing my final stitches to sew it up completely. With the burger buns and patties, I was careful to only use a very small amount of stuffing because I want the layers of the burger to all be stackable, and if I overfill them, they'll be too round and they won't sit flat on top of each other. Once I finish the last of my stitches, I tie a secure knot in the embroidery thread, and then I stick the needle inside the stuffing of the item. pass it through so it comes out the other side of the item. Then I pull the string tight and cut it off. So that once I straighten out the item, the end of the thread disappears inside of the stuffing. I repeated the same sewing technique with the burger patties, but first I just drew some grill marks on the pieces with a brown marker. You could also embroider these lines if you want to, or just leave them blank. So now that I've got my 2 buns and my 2 patties sewn, it's time to make some toppings for the burger. I cut a square of orangey yellow felt to create a slice of cheese. I freehand cut some blob shapes out of yellow and red felt to look like ketchup and mustard. I cut a wavy lettuce leaf shape out of some green felt and used a green marker to add some line details. Again, you could embroider those instead or just leave it blank. Next, I made some pickles. I have medium green and dark green felt, which I stacked on top of each other and cut 3 little blob shapes for the pickles. I want the dark green to show as an outline of the pickle, so I carefully trimmed a small amount of the edge off of the lighter green, trying to follow the same shape of its original blob. Once again, I added some details with a marker, which could also be embroidered. And then I hot glued the 2 layers of the pickle slices together. I made a total of 3 pickle slices for the burger. And that was the last of my burger toppings. To make the takeout box for my burger, I used white felt and placed my burger on top of it to give me an idea of the size I needed. I used a cutting mat and a roller cutter to mark my measurements. My roller cutter is a bit old and dull, so it makes a dent but doesn't fully cut my felt. So I just used it to make a guide for me to follow with a pair of scissors. I cut 2 identical squares for the top and bottom of the box. Then I measured the height of my burger and cut side panels for the box that are the same width as the top and bottom squares and tall enough to fully cover my burger. Then I used white embroidery thread and my blanket stitch again to sew the 4 sides along the bottom edges of the box, and I also sewed the corner edges of all the sides together. I sewed one side of the top square of the box along the edge of one of the side panels to create a little hinge for the lid. And finally, I made a short front flap for the lid of the box with a semicircle detail cut out of it to look like a takeout box. And I sewed it along the front edge of the box lid so it can be tucked in or left out on the outside of the box. To make this a more obvious McDonald's takeout box, I cut a piece of red felt to stick to the box lid. Then I used my Cricut machine to cut a small McDonald's M out of yellow felt. You could totally print and trace a McDonald's logo onto the felt to cut it by hand, but I actually don't have a printer, so it was easier for me to just use my Cricut machine and get a perfect cut. I hot glued the McDonald's M to that red square and then hot glued the square onto the burger box. And then my burger and takeout box were complete. Next, I made the chicken nuggets. I doubled up 2 pieces of light brown felt to cut the fronts and backs of the nuggets into identical blob shapes, and I cut 6 different shapes for the nuggets. These are pretty quick and easy to sew. I did the blanket stitch again and then stuffed them with stuffing before sewing them completely shut. I was more generous with the stuffing in the nuggets so that they'd be nice and plump. To make the takeout box for the nuggets, I did basically the same thing as the burger box, just with different dimensions. So once again, I used white felt and placed my nuggets on top of it to get an idea of the sizing, marked my measurements with a roller cutter and cutting mat, and made the bottom, the sides, the lid, and the front flap of the box. This one was more rectangular than my square burger box. And again, I used a piece of red felt and another McDonald's M that was cut with my Cricut machine to decorate the lid of the box for a McDonald's look. Next, I made the French fries. To make the fries, I cut 4 rectangles out of felt that were 1 centimeter wide and 14 centimeters tall. I used my cutting mat and roller cutter again to mark my measurements. Then I cut 2 centimeters off the ends of 3 of the rectangles to be 12 centimeters long, so that the 4th piece would have an extra square centimeter on both the top and bottom ends. This way I can fold each of those ends over to create the tops and bottoms of the French fries and close off the 3D shape. I used yellow embroidery thread and that same blanket stitch to sew the edges of each of the rectangles together. With the one longer piece, I made sure to have equal amounts of felt hanging off both edges at the top and bottom, and in addition to sewing down the long edges, I also folded over those top and bottom squares and sewed along the 3 open edges to connect it to the tops and bottoms of the other 3 sides of the fries. These are a bit trickier to fill with stuffing, but I used a long knitting needle to help shove the stuffing down into the end of the fries. I stuffed the fries along the way as I sewed the final edge so that it would be easier to get the stuffing in rather than waiting until it was almost fully sewn and trying to work it all down into the very end of the fry. I repeated this for a total of 8 fries, but I made some a little bit longer and some a little bit shorter than this one to vary the sizes. Sewing the fries was definitely the most time-consuming part of this project, but it's totally worth it because the finished fries look really awesome. The fry box is a bit trickier because fry boxes have a very distinct shape. So to make this box, I found a template for a fry box online and I cut this out with my Cricut machine as well. But again, you could print out and trace the template to cut it by hand. This was just the easier option for me. Then I hot glued the sides of the box together to construct the shape, and I finished it off with another McDonald's M that I also cut with my Cricut machine. And here is the end result of the fries. Finally, I wanted to make a McDonald's paper bag to store everything in. First, I placed my takeout boxes on top of my brown felt to get an idea of how big I needed the base of the paper bag to be to fit everything. I used a full sheet of felt for each of the larger sides of the bag, and then I measured 2 pieces for the narrower sides, but I actually cut them in half so that the sides would each be made out of 2 pieces. That way I could sew them together down the center of the side of the bag, and it would create the fold that paper bags always have and make it look a little more realistic. So I cut all my pieces out and sewed them all together using my blanket stitch technique. The only difference with my sewing is that when I sewed the 2 pieces together to create the narrower side panels, I sewed on the inside of the pieces instead of the outside so that the stitches would be hidden and the fold would go inwards towards the inside of the paper bag. Once the bag shape was all constructed, I needed to customize it to look like a McDonald's bag as well. So once again, I used a piece of red felt and a large McDonald's M that's a bit cut off on one side to create one of the classic McDonald's takeout bag designs. I cut the red by hand, but I cut the M with my Cricut machine. This would have been easier to glue to the bag before sewing the pieces together, but my hand sewing is not perfect and I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to interfere with the design with any of my stitches or seams. So I just smoothed it out as well as I could before gluing the logo onto both sides of the bag. And here is the final result. Felt has become one of my favorite materials to work with. I'm always so impressed with how my felt projects turn out, and this one was no exception. All the elements are so realistic, and my nephew immediately knew what each of the items were as he was pulling them out of the bag. I'd love to do more felt projects like this in the future, so if there's anything in particular you're looking for, please leave a comment and I'll do my best to make a video tutorial for you. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you enjoyed this video, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel and leave a comment letting me know what sort of projects you'd like to see in the future. See you later!